Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
And I'm Danielle Crittenden, and we're coming to you from our Zoom rooms, which, by the way, have not been rated on Room Rater. Christina, has your beautiful background with the flowers and the...
Oh, well, I'm going to up my game. It's just, I have prettier places in the house. I'm just stuck in this room. I have to move this computer.
Well,
what?
Because of your
I'm in the bedroom, and it's. I'll just be honest. It's the bedroom. What can I say?
We're joined by. Okay, we can't say our most favorite femsplainer because that would be potentially insulting to others.
But, of course,
our favorite femsplainers. Cate Flanagan is joining us from LA.
Her bedroom. Yes.
From her bedroom in LA in your day pajamas, as you call them.
Yes. Well, the bottom half are my day pajamas, but I didn't want to be judged. So the top is my very good Armani shirt that somebody gave me.
It's very pretty.
Thank you.
So if you get, you'll be able to watch this interview on our new YouTube channel.
Oh, okay. I figured I should look my best.
Yeah, well, thanks to Zoom, we can do this. But Christina, you did not join our conversation last week because when you start writing something, you become like a crazy
monk.
Soul.
No, I do. I become obsessed and happy, and I just stay here and work around the clock. And I didn't want to be I couldn't be disturbed, but it'll all be over soon.
But I love that word you use. I never heard, because I know a lot of people who are like us and just get in these, completely isolated times of writing. But I love that you said that you're happy. It's like a very joyful.
Oh, I'm in the zone. In the zone. And any interruption, even the dog has to have water. I'm traumatized because I don't want to eat. I would love to smoke. I don't smoke, but I don't even drink until very late.
Good.
Yeah. She said,
that's what they always say. And so I just think that's good to hear someone else feels the pleasure in it, because
there's such pleasure.
Yeah.
And then when you feel, I don't even know what I think about things half the time until I'm writing it.
Yeah.
And then I'm discovering it, and then I'll read something and it's absurd and shallow, and I have contempt, but I move on, and then I find out I get there eventually, usually.
Well, tell everyone what you've been writing about, because it's incredibly relevant to today's show.
I'm writing a review essay of the Mrs. America series on FX Hulu. And I have a love-hate relationship with it because the production values are so great, the acting. I have never seen a period piece on the 70s that brought it alive so vividly. Mm-hmm. The clothes, the music.
What it's about. Tell us what it's about.
It's about the battle over the ERA in the 1970s. So on the one side, you have these divas, the feminists, luminaries, Betty Friedan, Bella Abzug, of course, Gloria Steinem, as well as Shirley Chisholm plays a less role, but she's fabulous.
Fabulous.
And they're
fabulous.
Funny. Oh. The acting is just so, it's uncanny how good it is. And they look, particularly Cate Blanchett. And I spoke to her niece, Phyllis Schlafly's niece, who said that she was freaked out because when Cate Blanchett came up, she thought she was seeing her and certainly hearing her aunt. So all of that was good. On the other hand, these are great artists. I mean, it's in the sense of, they're top-notch Hollywood writers, creators, actors. But the lead writer, Davi Waller, is very talented, but it was clear for me from a number of interviews that she's burdened with this sort of dogmatic feminist training that she had in college and never recovered from. So you can see in the production kind of a war between the artist and the apparatchik.
Well, before we get into the weeds of this, we're going to have a heads up Anne Schlafly Corey, who at the time of this was, I think, 7 when it began, and then was in middle school. And she's Phyllis's daughter, and she later and continues to run
the Eagle Forum.
The Eagle Forum. So, and
what is that? What is it? It's sort of
it's like a pro-family, motherhood, marriage, looks out for. It's very conservative.
it became her major political vehicle, at least, from, well, Anne will tell us about it, but from the 80s onward. But so she's going to come on, and she's been quoted a little bit in the press about how she feels about this depiction of the time and her mother. But it got to even what I loved about it, this broader discussion. It was really the first dramatization that I have seen that so accurately. I mean, I'm sure there's character issues with the depiction, the portrayals, but the early women's movement of the 1970s, and the two characters, Phyllis Schlafly representing the
Housewives of America
housewife, although she was really nothing of the kind, but she stood up for that side. And then, of course, the uber hip, gorgeous Gloria Steinem on the let's smash it all up, ladies, and let's be modern and let's have all the rights that are done. So and then all the struggles within that movement too, with lesbians and with Black feminists.
They were constantly fighting,
and even between Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, and that was like an age popular girl, unpopular girl thing, I thought. But Caitlin, you wrote a book called "To Hell with All That: Loving and Loathing Our Inner Housewife." I think we're almost exact contemporaries. And my first book, What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us, came up with many of the same arguments when I was watching the show that Phyllis Schlafly was saying about the protection of marriage, about what women want. And I was so startled to see some of the arguments we were making, and not as huge conservatives and, certainly not housewives or modern women, but seeing the threat that certain aspects of a more ideological feminism threaten this life with, I guess, or challenges life, or don't want anything to do with this side of being a woman. So I would just love to hear your reaction from that respect.
Well, it was interesting because when I talk about, mothers and children and how wonderful it is if a mother wants to be home with a child, if she's able to do it, those two things are in place, how wonderful that is, and how clearly better it is for the child. And everybody screams when they hear that, and they run with a bunch of charts and studies to show that these kids do just as well or better in school and in careers and in this and that. And I'm sure they do. They have to be a little bit more independent. And these kind of measures aren't meaningful to me. What I'm talking about here is more, it's interesting, that was the 70s show. I was thinking a little bit more about the things that the generation just ahead of me in the 60s were kind of grappling with. What is a really deeply meaningful life? What is pleasure? What is, and that the idea that the feminist movement that was kind of coming up, or the idea of equality, would end up with all these women in cubicles typing budget spreadsheets and thinking that was better for them, and their child. It certainly wasn't better for their child. I think we have a lot of people in America, adults, who suffer from an attachment disorder on one level or another. I think, it's not good for a child to go from caregiver to caregiver. So that's where I was. And I'm kind of thinking a lot lately about women and pleasure, and ways in which feminism actually has robbed them of some pleasure. I think they're really robbed of sexual pleasure. The idea that when you start your sexual life as a woman, we all know having hookups and whatever, that's not going to be really fulfilling and powerful and intimate as having sexual life with, in a series, say, but with somebody who really cares about you and who really sees you and understands you. And the other thing of pleasure that I think young women are getting robbed of is the pleasure of being with a child. And I see so much, I can't tell you how many times at the Atlantic we've run it, and the New York Times runs it all the time. Some woman who's like, oh, I'm home with my children, and boy, there's a lot going on here at home. But I want to get back to work. But they're sort of seeing home has just become this place of contentious work. Child care, that is work that you should be compensated for in some way. And making food and doing jobs around the house. And as my brother-in-law, Andrew Clavin, always says, if a waiter, if a cook makes you a sandwich at a coffee shop, then that's a transaction, a business transaction. If your mother makes you a sandwich, that's an act of love, and that that the deepness of love is boring, work is boring, being home with kids can be super boring, but that the pleasure of that intense love that, particularly up through like age 7 or 8, when your children are looking at the mother like the goddess of all goddesses.
I missed that.
That's a big part to miss. Yeah, exactly. And then we get very quickly cured of it when the other part comes in. But I just think that women are one of the big things that this pandemic is showing is people sort of looking at their home life and realizing in a certain social class that home has just become this place that you've got to avoid the work. You've got to harass the husband to get him to do the same amount of work. It's nothing but work. You value work, but just work that you do outside of the home. And even your children are work. And you're adding up hours and being angry about that. And it just seems so joyless to me and so robbed of these very particular feminine, female pleasures of, as I said, a kind of sexuality that's what the 60s was all about, and that, I was an inheritor of as being coming of age in the 70s. It was like, you don't have to worry about not being a virgin. That's not going to make you a slut in high school. You can have a boyfriend. People understand things are going on. That's what part of the revolution was about. But to see all these young women now thinking the right thing is, these series of ugly encounters, which if they're in college, they have at least some redress, which is a bad form of redress. But somebody tells them that was actually non-consensual. Well, probably a lot of times it was consensual, but it was just really horrible.
Exactly.
Do you remember? Oh, excuse me. Do you remember a writer, Christopher Lash?
Yes, of course. Yes. Well,
and he wrote
he's got Haven in a Heartless World.
Haven in a Heartless World.
Yeah.
And there was a movement, a sort of communitarian movement, and there were communitarian feminists like Jean Beth Elstein, and who said that actually maybe our liberation is not for women and men to be full-time workers in the capitalist order. Yeah. The home was a haven, and the children, it was qualitatively different from the workplace. And that whole tradition of communitarianism seems to be forgotten. And because it was a critique of a certain kind of workplace, feminism from a liberal leftist perspective. Well, I haven't seen that.
And to Caitlin's point, what I loved was what you said about this pandemic. We were always trying to find the bright side of the pandemic here.
Right, exactly.
Of bringing together this, recreating these home lives in some ways that we lost. And you wrote in the new edition of The Atlantic just such a beautiful article. Well, you've written so many great articles, but this recent one, it was about being diagnosed with, you've been diagnosed with very serious stage 4 cancer for many, many, many years. I mean, you sort of hit the science curve, as it were, and have been benefited from miraculous treatments, which we're all very grateful for. And then the premise, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this article was like, you didn't appreciate being lumped in with the herd that might be thinned.
Right.
This, like, I always say when people say, well, we got to thin the herd to save the economy, I think, you could be the weak gazelle, friend. You just
exactly
don't assume you're not the weak gazelle. But you then sum this up, going back to your point about pleasure, which is so beautiful. And I don't know if I can read it without crying, so just brace yourself. But you felt your whole life was consumed with, illness and how it affected you as a mother. And then you looked back upon it. You started going through photo albums, as I think a lot of us are doing right now that we have the time. And you said, I recently looked through all of our photo albums, something I never do because I feel so sad about what happened, the illness. And I was stunned by what I saw. I didn't see pictures of 2 sad boys. I saw picture after picture of 2 boys with huge smiles on their faces, pictures of vacations and soccer games and art classes, and all the fun to be had on the swing set I bought at Costco when I first got sick. In Costco, it had looked a reasonable size. in our small backyard. It looked like a condo building had gone up. It looked ridiculous. The boys loved it. Looking at all those pictures, I realized something. This was my life's work. I gave the boys the best childhood I possibly could. And I think that's something that gets lost in this whole argument about work and home, that, as you say, our children just become tasks, or we're taught to think of them that way. And then you look at a whole childhood that has passed, and you did your best, and as we all do. And anyway,
I think we all hold ourselves out to this standard. Everyone says this, of course, but as growing up as girls and then young women, we have an idea of what it's going to be like. And it's a totally wrong idea. It's so much, it's so overwhelming. The love that you feel, it's so overwhelming. The extra tasks and work that you didn't expect, that they're absolutely right. There's a lot of just cleaning up and doing things. But then you realize, well, I really made it intentional when I got the first diagnosis 17 years ago to really focus on how do I do this with my boys who were 4 when I was diagnosed, and then just then they turned 5 when just after I'd had my first surgery. And I went to, at UCLA, they have this wonderful resource, the Ted Mann Cancer. It's just for the psychosocial elements of all this. And I found this social worker, and I said, I just don't know what to do. I have these really little boys. And she said, well, what are you telling them? And I said, oh, I had a bump and they gave me special medicine and I'm taking it now. And because I have a certain disease, and then I'll be well again. And she said, you can't use that language. You have to use the exact language, because the next time they need to take Tylenol, they'll say, oh, is this the medicine that makes you lose your hair? The next time they get a bump in the playground, oh, is this what happened to mom? Is this why mom is so sick? And so she said, you need to say you have cancer, and that you're on chemotherapy, and that works on the cancer, and it's going to make you kind of tired for a while, and focus on that we have lots of extra help, and my sister and coming, you'll never have a gap in being taken care of. And I so didn't want to do it, but she gave me one of the children's book about having breast cancer, and I was like, oh, I just don't want to tell the truth. I opened up the book, and they just, the truth. Okay, I get it. And Patrick, who's in the picture in that article, as soon as I finished the book, fortunately I couldn't read yet. So the last page was like, we don't know what's going to happen. I was always like, and the mother got well. But
in a superhero costume at the end.
Exactly. It's like everything went great.
Powers.
But he took that book and he ran out the door, and he ran to our next door neighbor. And he said, this is the book. Read this book. And she sat and read it with me. He took it to another neighbor. He just wanted to know what's happening, because something really big was happening. The words didn't match it. And to see it really normalized in a picture book. Oh, this little boy, I'm not thrown out to like planet Zorkon with, this weird situation. Others have lived with it. So I really tried all the way through to check in with resources like that about how to parent a child when the mom is very sick. And unfortunately, the illness really stayed with me in different ways, and we had to deal with it. But yeah, I realized that was my life's work. Like, I looked at some of those pictures, and I know I was wearing a wig that day, and they're having a great time. And I can remember just sitting, the sidelines of something. But yeah, it was a big work. Joan Didion has that line about it's often when you're doing something else, you think the little thing you're doing, the articles say that you're writing, you think that that's your life.
Right.
But really your life was over here. Your life were these children, these boys. And, it is. That's why I guess balance is the big thing everyone talks about. But I don't know, the horribleness of this, at least it got me very centered on them and their growing up and their thoughts about all this. And I knew they would get to a point pretty quickly, because they were 5 by then, where they'd see on a TV show, oh, someone died of cancer. They would hear that it was a serious disease. So yeah, it was hard. It was really hard. But the reason I went through the picture books, as I mentioned in there, that I just happened to have a picture of me with one of the boys the day before I was diagnosed. We were on a field trip, and I was a chaperone, very important position. And a friend at the same field trip snapped a picture of me with Patrick. And I always feel like that's the last day of our old life. That's the record. The next day at 2:00, that life died and a new life was born, which was.
You went, yes, that's the life in Cancerland, a friend of mine.
Yes. Barbara Ehrenreich wrote that, right?
I heard it from, someone must have read her.
Yeah.
Well, this, I think I told you that David's mother, who was a broadcaster and journalist, got diagnosed when she was, when the kids were very small, like I think in your situation, and when she was in her 30s, very otherwise healthy. And at that time, she was well behind the science, unfortunately. And they said, basically you have a year to live. And she ended up having 19 more years to live, thank God. But she came up with this phrase that stays with me, and it's in a way that your perspective of dealing with illness is similar to hers. And it sounds, we make it sound so trite, like, oh, well, you learn to appreciate life, you learn not to, but it's true, it's focusing. Right. And she used to say that there are people who know and people who don't. And no one who has gone through, and it applies to anything, tragedy. You wrote this beautiful book about, article about the class of 2020, and they're, they're not getting their graduation, but history is called upon them. And that's also an article I recommend everybody read, but being very focused on what is your full life. What is it that you love? What is your life's work, as you said? And to know, to have that perspective from where you were and where she was, I think was incredibly powerful and drove her to be such, she kept it secret from her kids for the longest time because she didn't want them to have that burden. And when they found out, they were, of course, very sad, but they were relieved because they felt, I think children sense things and they want to know the truth.
They do.
So do you find it?
Yeah. I mean, it's an incredible act of love when a mother doesn't tell.
Yes.
But kids know sometimes we think of the kids as these little people that we can hide things from them. I mean, kids pretty much know everything. Like
they know everything.
They know everything.
Years later, they'll tell you. Do you find it pleasant to look back through family photographs? I mean, sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And I look and I think, oh, I was so young and I didn't even know it, And
yes.
And it's a different world or a dimension, and it went so fast. It makes me sad sometimes,
that's what I feel that way too. I don't like, my husband he'd love nothing more than we watch videos every night of the kids. It makes me sad. And I remember once with my mother, she was, I guess maybe 70 or I don't know, that age around. I found an old picture of me and my sisters, the girls, and we're sort of standing at the kitchen door of the house that we lived in when we were really little. And I thought, oh, Mom will love this. So I had it like enlarged a little bit and I put it in a frame and I, brought it up to Berkeley and gave it to her. And she opened it up and she just closed her eyes and she put the wrapping paper down and said, "Are you trying to make me cry?"
Oh.
To her, it was just this loss.
Right. I hate
you lose your babies.
No, I hate Facebook memories, especially, you don't mind them when you're young, but when, a Facebook memory from 10 years ago pops up, your child 10 years younger, you 10 years younger. I just well, thank you, Facebook memories, for wrecking my day and making me cry. Thank you.
Yes.
But we're going to bring Anne on in a moment. And this, I guess, brings it back to this circle of the sort of perennial struggle that women seem to have that men don't, this whole thing about balance, but can we get beyond this? Something I'd like to ask Anne, too, with her mother, that her mother was a very important, very busy person who had 6 kids. But, she definitely did not see just staying at home taking care of kids was the be-all and end-all. But
she thought you should do it in stages. She did stay home. She had 6 kids, and she stayed home for most of them. Then she went to law school at age 50.
Was she a late law student? I didn't realize she went to law school that late.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. So did Ruth. So did Margaret Thatcher. Not as old as 50. And I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
No, Ruth was Bader Ginsburg. I only know from the documentary.
Yeah.
Shot through law school immediately after college.
Right. But Margaret Thatcher stayed home with her kids, and that
oh, good. Okay.
whole argument for having it all. But let's just pause there for a second. We'll have a word from our sponsor, and then
I'll put my glasses on for this part.
This week, our podcast is sponsored by Brooklinen. As we know, the way we live our lives has changed dramatically over the past 2 months, and many, if not most of us, are spending much more time at home. But making small changes to our everyday life, even in quarantine, can lead to positive lifestyle changes. The right towel turns a bathroom into a spa. The right loungewear turns function into luxury, and the right bedding turns a bed into a retreat. Founded in early 2014 by husband and wife duo Rich and Vicky Fulop, they wanted to find beautiful home essentials that didn't cost an arm and a leg. And today, they're on a mission to make you comfortable. Brooklinen is the first direct-to-consumer bedding company. They work directly with manufacturers and directly with customers. No middlemen, just a great product and service. All luxury products without the luxury markup. So Brooklinen.com is the perfect place to start making small changes that make big differences. Brooklinen is so confident in their product that all their sheets, comforters, loungewear, and towels come with a lifetime warranty. So this could go on for a while. Make yourself comfortable. Get 10% off your first order and free shipping when you use promo code FEMSPLAIN. Only at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Promo code FEMSPLAIN. Brooklinen, everything you need to live your most comfortable life. We're also sponsored this week by Sakara. Just as all of us are spending a lot of time at home, we're also trying to limit trips to the grocery store. It's really hard to get fresh vegetables and fruits that will keep us healthy, focused, and energized. Making fresh, delicious meals have become a challenge, but with Sakara, they can be delivered straight to your door. Sakara is a nutrition company that believes wellness begins with what you eat. Their signature nutrition program brings the transformational power of plant nutrition to your home in the form of fresh, plant-rich, ready-to-eat meals made with organic ingredients and powerful superfoods. Each meal is expertly designed to boost immunity, improve energy, support gut health and digestion, and get your skin glowing, which is even better. From hearty salads and nutrient-dense granolas to savory flatbreads and seasonal fruit parfaits, their ever-changing menu of creative chef-crafted meals makes clean eating delicious. In addition to their delicious meals, Sakara also offers daily essentials like supplements and herbal teas to complete your wellness routine and support overall health and vitality. To boost immunity, which we all need to do these days, try their best-selling daily probiotic blend of detox water drops with pure chlorophyll. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their order when they go to sakara.com/femsplain. Or you can enter FEMSPLAIN at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/FEMSPLAIN to get 20% off your order. Sakara.com/FEMSPLAIN. Stay safe and healthy, everybody, with Sakara.
Anne, welcome to the Femsplainers.
So happy to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I have been watching the series, Mrs. America. I met your mother a few times, and I'll tell you, I was talking about this in the intro. We introduced you in the intro, so I talked about your mom. And the series, it seems like it kind of wants to tell some truth about how incredible your mother was, and effective and brilliant, and it wants to reveal the failings of the feminists as well. On the other hand, and it does that beautifully, but most of the time it's just inventing stories to slam her. And yes. So they try to show that she's great, but then they show she's a duplicitous sister-in-law, she's a bad mother, she's an oppressed wife, and it's almost, and they made it up. She made these things up.
I think they can't figure out, they sort of at times call her intelligent, but then they show her as a puppet of my father, a puppet of other men. And it's like they can't get the story quite right.
Well, I think they don't understand the story. It's just too far
they don't
outside
want to give
their
credit to a woman who bested them.
Yeah.
That she must have been coached or led by somebody else. Surely she couldn't have done it on her own.
Well, what
I felt like that. Oh,
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
This is Caitlin. I felt the moment when I felt, the tell for the makers of the series that, they really hate this person, and they're finding ways to really admire her, but what she's talking about, they hate so much. And I felt that was in the scene where she'd had this really long day, and then her husband wanted to have sex with her. And it was like, and it was sort of like not negotiable. It was like, I'm tired. Well, no, that's fine. We'll do it when you're tired. And I thought, so they just want her to be a surrendered wife who just has to, even after a long day, the wifely duty. And I thought, okay, it's pretty clear what side they're on.
I don't know.
And you saw the look of contempt that Cate Blanchett had towards her husband in that scene.
Yes.
Well, tell us, Anne. I thought, Caitlin, that was bold to suggest that Anne would tell us about the sexual dynamics of her parents' marriage.
Nobody wants to think about that. Nobody wants to think about that.
But they really had a loving marriage. It was a love match, and they were much more two peas in a pod than they were this power game that they're showing.
Well, he loved her, and the way they met was, I just thought, so revealing that he read some high-powered argument about, I don't know, nuclear strategy or something, and he thought, I got to meet this writer, assuming it was a man. And then it was this beautiful woman, and he said, I fell in love with her mind, and it was love at first sight sort of thing. And every time I looked at a lot of videos I could find online, when I saw them together, they were equals. They'd met one another's match. I mean, and you grew up with that, so.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and they very much. And it's important that to remember that my father supported my mother intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. They were fully a team. They enjoyed debating the issues of the day back and forth. And the idea that my father was, didn't want her to go out in public or didn't want to run for office, actually, they missed his humor. He had a great deal of humor. And he used to like to say, I regret that I have but one wife to give to my country.
And he was called, he sometimes would introduce himself as Mrs. Schlafly.
Mr. Phyllis.
Mr. Phyllis.
And he enjoyed being called Mr. Phyllis.
Yes.
Something, I think for the feminist producers of this show, the problem is that my parents had a marriage that they envied, so they had to trash it.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things, and I thought, I have not come away from the show with such a negative image of your mom. I think that they're trying to, inevitably, in some ways, she has to be a character representing a side in addition to who she was, as opposed to a straight biopic. One of the things that I found interesting, I'd love to hear what you would have to say, is, and this comes from the first episode, there's a depiction of her embracing the anti-ERA cause, or so-called women's issues, even though she was a very accomplished, she and actually your dad wrote together a very significant paper for the American Bar Association, I think, that had transformative impact on defense. You can correct me, but she was a defense and missile specialist. And early on in the series, they show her in a room with, congressmen, and they keep kind of, yeah, thank you, Phyllis, and what we would today call kind of silencing her.
They told her to take notes.
Or take notes, and then
she got that from a footnote she misunderstood. But
then, according to the series, she kind of latched on to the ERA/women's issues because that's where she could get taken seriously as a woman within the Republican circles that she was in. Is that accurate at all?
No, their point is to show her as power mad, that she was an opportunist. That is what they want to show in this. But I think what that fundamentally misunderstands is her core beliefs. And what we have not seen in this series is her faith in Jesus Christ, which was central to every political position she took. I mean, the reason she was interested in the Equal Rights Amendment was not because she saw it as an opportunity, but because she saw it would fundamentally change the American family.
There's a scene. I want to know have you seen the scene where she goes into the smoke-filled room? This is the 1976 Republican convention, and she wants to negotiate with them. And these are this is the ultimate old boys network. Phyllis walks in and they want her mailing list. She wants them to take the ERA off the Republican platform. They don't want to deal with her. And they show her, they exaggerate, but they show her getting insulted and someone tells an obscene joke. But Cate Blanchett, I think she couldn't help herself, but her acting is so great that you see Phyllis kind of smiling and being gracious and taking stock. And then you see kind of a military genius at work, and she gets a little smile. And it's like the look of a chess master playing simultaneous chess, and he's just going to checkmate everybody in the room. And then the soundtrack comes in with Leslie Gore's "You Don't Own Me, I'm Not Just One of Your Little Toys." And it's sort of like one of the greatest scenes of like female empowerment. Did you see that scene? I'm probably projecting into it.
No, you did. And when they came in with the song, I thought, well, here they are giving credit to Phyllis Schlafly as being quite powerful. But I think that my mother learned early on that her power was much better in the heartland and with the grassroots than it ever was trying to play in the Washington, D.C. old boys network. She always kept herself at arm's distance from them and really tried to leverage her power outside of Washington. And now, obviously, that scene is a fictional scene.
Of course.
And the reason I know that is because my mother, we now call it the Mike Pence rule, but she never went alone to a place where there was a man who was not her husband without somebody going with her as a chaperone type. I mean, it just was not possible. I was frequently her chaperone when she was not with her husband, because she considered it to be, that she had an image and a reputation to maintain, and that you don't get yourself in a compromising situation. And she wouldn't have gotten herself in that kind of compromising situation where they, pushed a glass of scotch on her.
Oh, right. And then they in a way they rigged the timeline. Have you seen the last episode?
Well, I've seen this past one.
Oh, but I've seen the whole thing because I'm reviewing it, so I got a copy.
Oh, well, they wouldn't let me see the whole thing. They very much said, no, you can't see it.
Okay, well, excuse me, but I've seen the whole thing. They want to leave her in the kitchen. I mean, spoiler alert, she's left in the kitchen. But they ended in 1980. And so they're claiming that she did all this because she wanted an appointment to the Supreme Court or something in the Reagan administration. And she's back in Alton, Missouri in her kitchen. But the ERA was defeated in 1983. And there was a big fight. So they make it look like the gala celebrating its demise was a year earlier so they could have this defeat. But Phyllis, she knew, when I've read about her, she didn't take politics personally. She knew it was all jockeying, you know, and that in the Reagan administration, she was with the moral majority and the values conservatives, and it was they were not a priority, certainly in the first Reagan administration. So she wasn't selected, but they made it seem like it was the crushing failure of her life. It was so arbitrary.
Well, and of course there was no crushing failure of her life.
I know. Nothing changed. She went on, and then she had this huge victory when the ERA was not able to pass.
And in 1982, they continued to, try to get support for ERA in the State House in Illinois. And they got so upset, they painted the steps of the Capitol with pig's blood. They were so mad about it.
And chained themselves to the door and went on hunger strikes.
Yes, and all of those things.
She was amused by it because they were showing how crazy they really were. Because the members of Congress didn't think the ERA, they thought it was symbolic, kind of a gesture of goodwill. What your mother discovered in her readings was that these feminist activists had something very different in mind. They actually wanted a gender-neutral society with women and men both, for example, in combat.
And let's remember where her information came from. It came from a book written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the mid-1970s called Sex Bias in the U.S. Code. And my mother used all the lines in that book as her arguments. And it's funny, she was called fear-mongering, but those were the actual changes in the law that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was supporting.
Interesting. It's really, everything is so fascinating to me. And just hearing this story, Hollywood is so frustrating to me because on the one hand, as Christina was saying, these prestige television shows, I mean, the talent on every level of the way it looks, the way the writing is, the talent of the actresses and actors is so high. But
I really felt sorry for Betty Friedan. I thought they kind of, they really, she comes across as
I thought that was Betty Friedan's most glamorous portrayal ever.
She never looked better.
Really easy. Yeah, you never saw her husband. I think they're suggesting her alcoholism with the drinking, but I don't know where it goes. I was like, I mean, it's a wonderful portrayal of a person that's very like Betty Friedan, but Betty Friedan was just, she didn't pull a punch, and they kind of indicated there that it was, that her book had so revolutionized people, but then they were on to the next stage of the revolution and how painful that was for her. So that I think was true.
Yeah, she looks like a sad sack.
Yes.
But I think Gloria Steinem is, first of all, she's just like this the whole time. And so,
she's the worst. She's the worst.
And then there's a scene where she says, I guess it's Jill Ruckelshaus, the Republican wife, but pro-ERA, says, we don't want people to think we're against housewives. And then this sullen ACLU lawyer, feminist, Brenda, says, we are against the housewives. And then Gloria says, revolutions are hard, Who wanted their revolution? And this was in 1975.
I thought the Gloria Steinem character, by the way, was eerily like her, so intoxicatingly attractive and cool and the popular girl. But Anne, let's also not pretend that there wasn't a lot of, sexism in general back then. Certainly sexism within the Republican Party that we're seeing right now.
And the Democratic Party.
Yeah, but it's especially true, I would say, right now. And you broke with your mother. She died in 2016, I think. And you broke with your mother because she came out, she supported Trump. Her book was published posthumously. I'm just looking for the name of it, but it was a pro-Trump book that came out.
The Conservative Case for Trump.
The Conservative Case for Trump, a day after.
Title.
and as you say, she was it makes total sense that she was driven by her Catholicism and her beliefs. And in some ways, she brought Catholics to the Republican Party away from the Democrats, after JFK. But yet in the end, she came out for Donald Trump. Tell us what you think of that.
Well, first of all, what happened with Eagle Forum is that we had to fire a short-term president who had proved to be a disaster and was undermining and trying to destroy the organization. And the big kerfuffle in 2016 had nothing to do with who was going to be president and everything to do with the management of Eagle Forum. And I'm proud to stand with the female volunteers who had worked with my mother for decades in ousting this bad president and reestablishing the organization on the truths of the organization. My mother liked winners, and she saw in Donald Trump somebody who would win, and that's why she supported him, was because she wanted, she was tired of candidates who would lose or kowtow to the Democratic Party.
But you apparently broke with that. Were you a supporter of Donald Trump?
Well, I voted for Donald Trump in November of 2016.
Can I ask you about something? I saw this debate that we see with your mother just being destroyed by this ACLU lawyer, Brenda. Mm-hmm. But I saw an actual tape of the debate. It was on the Tom Snyder Tomorrow Show, and it was the lawyer, the feminist lawyer, that was destroyed. So and I heard that this Davi Waller quoted, who said, "Well, I did take liberties with the text, but only private conversation." She said, "Every event and debate is real." No, she made up this debate and she reversed the roles and made it look like your mother was the loser.
Well, she had to do that because the previous episode showed Betty Friedan losing her cool to
But even that was made up. She made it look like your mother insulted Betty. Now, yes. Your mother, I've seen her debate. Mm-hmm. She did not use ad hominems. She was always about the argument, the point, the legal. She didn't. They made that up. They made it look like she drove Betty to overreact and say she wanted to burn her at the. What did Betty say? Betty Friedan said she wanted to burn your mother at the stake. But they make it look like that was because your mother was persecuting her, talking about.
Well, because they show this idea that her husband bullies her, and then she turns around and bullies her daughter, and then she bullies Betty Friedan, and the pornographic publisher is bullying Gloria Steinem. And so it's a whole episode about the effects of bullying and how, and trying to make my mother seem like she was a bully.
Now, tell us about Eleanor. Eleanor's, did she live in your house and take care of you and do all the work?
No.
This was
was Eleanor.
Eleanor was my father's sister.
Oh, right.
And Eleanor was a force of her own.
That's what I've heard.
If you, when Eleanor and Phyllis were in the room together, Eleanor dominated. She ran her own organization for 50 years. It was a conservative Catholic organization. And she had the last thing she would ever need is social help from her brother in the small town, because my Aunt Eleanor had a large house and a glamorous social life all of her own.
Huh.
They invent this character and make her look like she lives with the Schlaflys and does all the work, raises all the children. And then they show Phyllis being cruel to her, disinviting her to Thanksgiving and never thanking her. It was BS.
I haven't seen that episode yet.
Oh my God. It gets worse. Whatever you've seen now, it gets worse. They get angrier and angrier. I think because they realized maybe they'd been too nice or something. And so they're making amends because I've heard people have said to her in interviews, well, you kind of make her look too human and normal. She says, well, wait till you get to the end. So somehow they go full, demonization.
Well, they have to.
Episodes.
It's Hollywood. That's what I wasn't very articulate when I said it, but if you had pitched that story, if they had pitched that story, like we have learned that Phyllis Schlafly was a very, very admirable woman, a real intellectual, someone who engaged with nuclear debates before she began this cause, and that she was really inspired by this kind of Christianity and this idea of what was best for the American family. Can we make that documentary? They would say, leave immediately. Just get out of here. They would say, well, and then you say, well, I have these actresses attached, but okay, but Phyllis is going to be the bad guy, right? And it's just, Hollywood would never, ever, ever deploy those levels of resources, of actors, etc., to tell a story that way. And it has consequences, because the culture sees that the culture that sort of would agree with Phyllis Schlafly, that the children and grandchildren now, they see that the media is against them. They see that their values aren't portrayed with respect on high profile shows, and that they're even mocked. And that's why we have this divide.
Here's the thing. She ran an organization of women. And if she were a power mad, controlling, bullying kind of leader, why did women stick with her? Why were they so loyal to her? Why do they honor and praise her today? It was because she was an encourager, she was a role model, and she mentored women. And that's the story that they've missed in this show.
I think everybody on this panel has been called some version of a female Uncle Tom. That came out in the show about your mom, and Caitlin, Christina, when you advocate for a non-ideological view, you get called that. What do you say to that? And is that, tell us about, the issues for women now that you are dealing with. We seem to be in a hamster wheel of just these same things coming back. Everything your mother said is a version of what we have been saying, and I'm sure now what you're saying.
Well, I do think the producers are correct in that a lot of the issues that were discussed in the 70s are still current today, and that's why this show has had a lot of viewership because of that. But the left always talks about diversity, but it is superficial diversity. They've never been interested in diversity of opinions, and their response to opinions they don't like is usually to slander or to slur. But I think we see this in the Me Too movement, which has been strictly as a political tool as opposed to a true examination of sexual harassment or sexism. I mean, you've asked about, yes, wasn't there sexism? Well, of course there was sexism, because men and women are fundamentally different. And there is always going to be an undercurrent of the differences between men and women. And you can try to legislate and pretend they don't exist, but they're there. And, are there plenty of men who behave badly? Yes. And, but that doesn't mean that we don't have opportunity to present ourselves and to do well. And the arc of my mother's career over 70 years really showed that if you have a positive attitude and ignore the sexism, rather than playing the victim card, you can get ahead and have a success rather than whining and moaning.
Oh, by the way, remembered a scene in the movie. This violent man comes out of nowhere. This really happened, and hits your mother in the face with a pie, but so hard that it scratched her cornea. She had to wear an eye patch. God. But what does she do? She kind of pushes the whipped cream away and says, well, thank goodness it wasn't a cherry pie. It would have stained my dress. And
then she made her speech.
And then she gave her speech.
Well, that picture was on the front page of the newspaper across the country when that happened, when she got hit in the face with a pie. And, for a lot of people on the left, it was like, well, why didn't you hit her harder? I mean, there is a double standard when it comes to conservative women.
Oh, well, Florence Kennedy was on a radio show in Miami and said, why doesn't somebody punch her in the face? And Florence Kennedy is treated like the heroine of the series, but, she was complicated and obviously had a violent, imagination.
And one of the things, my eldest daughter, who's 28, watched the first episode, and I after I watched the first episode, I said, God, it's so funny. I mean, she's saying all the things that we're trying to say, and it all made perfect.
Okay, never mind.
She always forgets to silence.
No, I don't.
All of it made sort of perfect sense to me. And my daughter was like, it was like she was speaking Chinese, like, oh my God, I can't in any way identify with this woman. And look, to be stressed, she grew up with me. So she's had a lot of these same messages, but filtered through a modern vocabulary. So but it just seems, I'm sure, freakishly historical and women in combat, blah, blah, blah. But what do you think? I mean, as head of now a women's organization, what do we tell our daughters? Do you have daughters? What is the message you would convey to them now?
Well, I think it does sort of seem like a historical set piece, but a lot of the issues are still current today. And in the New York Times today, they have a full-page article bemoaning that the people under the age of 25 are pro-life and anti-abortion. And so it took generations to work through some of these issues, but you now see the result of it. And the New York Times was stunned that these young people who seemed like they could be liberal on so many other issues like climate change would continue to support the Republicans because they were not the Democrats who they saw as virulently pro-abortion. And explaining these issues on the conservative side is never in a soundbite. It always has to be a long discussion because the soundbite our issues can't be explained in a glib way. We have to dive in and say, if we treat men and women interchangeable in every situation, women get harmed, and then go through the reasons why women get harmed and why we should celebrate differences between men and women and not try to pretend that they don't exist because of the harms that happen to women. I mean, certainly when I was young and in my 20s, I thought I was as invincible as anybody else I met. And then I realized, well, there are problems with that. And there are ways that I can get myself in trouble if I think of myself as invincible. But at 28, like your daughter, I certainly thought, well, anything a man can do, I can do better. I mean, that was always the feeling at that point, at that age.
I grew up thinking that, very honestly, and I write lots of things about boys and men and how they're mistreated in the culture, but my honest belief was that they were not as bright as we were in school. I thought they have these things they do, but I thought they had a less intelligence. I don't know why I would think that, but I really thought the girls
they were the weaker students. Boys really didn't show up in the advanced classes until advanced math classes, and then they were
10 minutes.
We have today where college graduation rates are 60% female. So you do see women much more academically studious and more motivated to get a college degree today. And that causes ripples throughout our culture because of that. But there's no question that academically, we can always compete head to head with men and boys. But there are other physical differences that are quite that make quite a bit of difference.
Yeah, consequential.
Well,
did your mother ever jump in the pool with you?
No.
And force you to?
Oh, that was so weird.
It was weird.
Well, that was the idea of showing her as a bully to lesser women, don't you think?
Yeah.
Tell them about the scene and then what really happened. Did your mom give you swimming lessons?
We did have a pool in our backyard, and I remember always swimming, and I don't remember us any time being afraid of going into the water and swimming. I think I swam from an early age.
So in this show, they show you kind of crying in your room or something, and the bad Eleanor is protecting you in complete fantasy, a complete fabrication. And then your mother says, "What are you doing, Eleanor? She's got to, go back in." And she grabs you and you're terrified. She jumps in the pool and you
Well, she puts her own suit on too, though, doesn't she?
Yeah,
Her like, swimming cap, and it was like a mommy dearest, mother dearest.
A mommy dearest moment.
Well, here's the thing. They're showing her as a strict, almost terrorizing parent. And the truth be told, my mother was a coddler. She was, I think she was a little too soft as a parent and too easy. I mean, if I wanted to get my way, it was much easier to go to my mother.
Oh my goodness. I'm not surprised.
Well, one of the things that does come out in the movie that her eldest son, your brother, was gay. Is gay. Sorry. It's not a past tense thing. Forgive me. And, she was, one of the reasons she was against the ERA was because she felt, correctly it would lead to same-sex marriage. And we got that, that came about regardless. How has your brother reacted to this? And what would you say about her views vis-a-vis her son and the gay rights issues?
Well, I go back to her deep Catholic faith. My mother did not believe in sex outside the married sex of husbands and wives. And so was she, she didn't want her child to have another kind of life. But as she always said, you can't make your adult children do something, if they're going to do what they want to do. But that did not diminish her love for her son. But it certainly, did she always want him not to be? And did she want him to find happiness in a married life with a female? Of course she did, because that was her core life belief.
Were they reconciled when she died?
They were never irreconcilable.
They were never not reconciled. She loved him.
She loved all of them.
He loved her. She loved all of them. I mean, she was a loving mother. They tried to make her mommy dearest, but I never.
Tell us, Anne, how that worked. Were you there when he sort of came out? Like, how did that happen? How do you come out to a mom who is has those beliefs?
Well, what actually happened was in 1992, my mother had successively in multiple Republican National Conventions made an effort to change the party platform to be pro-life and to remove abortion from the Republican Party platform. So this effort to do this took multiple years because there were quite a lot of forces against her, the most prominent of which was the wife of Roger Stone, who I understand makes a cameo at the end, which is kind of strange because my mother battled the Stones over this very issue of abortion in the Republican Party platform.
I remember her. I met her. We knew her. Do you remember?
Anne Stone.
Anne Stone. I met her.
Yes. And so this was a hot battle. And 1992 was the hottest of them all, and where my mother finally won the language that she wanted, which is still in there today. And right after that, in retaliation.
He was outed.
He was outed.
By Advocate.
And it was done in retaliation. It was not my brother's choice.
Right, it was by magazine, right? Queer.
The Advocate. That was brutal.
And so once it comes out, there it is. So that's what you have to deal with. And my mother gave interviews on it at the time and then said, I don't ever want to talk about it again, which is very much like my mother.
Can I ask you one thing? Wouldn't a little part of your mother sort of enjoy this series? And I ask that because I saw, when I met her, she was much older, but even to the last minute, she was elegant. She was dressed to the nines. She was, let's say she was a little vain. I mean, she enjoyed being an attractive woman. And
yes. And I think she was more than a little vain.
I think so too. And she wasn't a prude.
No.
So she never, in the opening scene, we see her in a bikini at some kind of nightmare.
But she wouldn't have done that.
She would never have done that.
Because I wasn't even allowed to wear a bikini.
I know. No one ever saw your mother in a bikini. It was a complete fabrication. But there she is in some imagined fashion, whatever, I don't know, trying to raise money for the Republican Party and strolling around. She looks pretty good. Mm-hmm. So part of her would probably okay, fine. I don't think she would.
I think she would have relished the attention that a beautiful actress was playing her. There's no doubt about that.
I agree.
Famous actress. One of the encounters I had with her was in the Republican convention of 1988. Mm-hmm. I had just gotten married, and Caitlin, Christina will appreciate this is David's idea of a fun
anniversary.
No, like almost honeymoon trip to go to the Republican convention.
But it was in New Orleans. That's a fun place to go.
That was fun. But I remember she was such a huge presence. And George Bush Sr. had appointed Dan Quayle, the big reveal of who his running mate was going to be. And I remember going to, I guess, the Eagle Forum reception of one of the evenings. And I didn't really know who she was, but she just had such a spectacular presence. She was on a kind of staircase.
Mm-hmm. It was at the New Orleans Art Museum. And
okay. You remember? You were there?
I was there. And what the funny thing is that she was standing there. The portrait behind her was of Marie Antoinette.
Oh, no.
So right. Oh, and so we were part of a receiving line, and we were with a very good friend of ours who's from Texas and involved in Republican circles. So she recognized him right away. And of course, he's at that time and remains a very handsome man. And she kind of got all kittenish with him and said, and he said, well, what do you think of, the choice of Dan Quayle? And she said, well, he's a very handsome kind of manly man. And if the men vote for him, then it'll appeal to men. And then if the men vote for him, of course, the women will follow. And I was just like, I was so gobsmacked and yet impressed with her.
I had the same thing. I was on a talk show. I'd written my book, Who Stole Feminism? And she has a talk show or something, on the radio talk show. And I go on, and immediately, and I'm showing that Gloria Steinem just mangled the facts, and she claimed completely hysterically that 150,000 girls are dying every year of anorexia nervosa, this eating disorder that, in desperate efforts to please the patriarchy, that women are dying at the rate of 150,000 a year. And I showed that this came out of, it was just one of many, many hysterical exaggerations. And then a young woman calls up and said, well, maybe she got the statistics wrong, but all my friends have eating disorders. They all have bulimia or anorexia. And I'm then thinking, oh God, what am I? And then your mother says, well, I think you should find new friends.
The witty quip was part of her techniques. There's no doubt about it.
She has a great presence of mind. Last question before we let you go. And again, we're so happy to have you here and hear this backstory. What would you, I asked, and I'm sorry I don't already know this, but do you have daughters?
I do not.
Okay. So if you did, let's just pretend, what would you tell your daughters? What is the message of Eagle Forum today to young women? What would you say?
I think it is a message of empowerment that you can succeed, because I have always found that the message of feminism, and I think we see this in this show, that Gloria Steinem talks about it being a half-life. And I think that holds women back. I do think that we can do anything we want to do if we set our mind to it, and the world is open to us. But what my mother always said is, you can do it, but you can't do it all at the same time. And she always encouraged women to plan their lives so that they could partake of all of it and not just some of it. And of course, planning your life means getting a successful marriage and family as being a primary part of it, because I think both men and women do better and succeed better when they're in a successful marriage, but particularly women, that the satisfaction that you get from a wonderful marriage is worth more than so many other things, and that you need to value it and put an emphasis on it and work for it. And what we have today are so many women who are unmarried, boys and young men and women who have not attached themselves, and I think they're missing out on a crucial part of life. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of policy issues, this is fighting against the culture, because the culture almost celebrates the independence and celebrates the self-fulfillment as opposed to the fulfillment you get in a marriage, and working towards promoting a marriage and family culture is very hard in current pop culture, because that's not what we're seeing. But in the end, it's what we all crave and what we all want. So we hope to always encourage and provide after all, Christina, you just said, get better friends. Mm-hmm. If you surround yourself with Debbie Downers, you will be a Debbie Downer.
I know, but I think it's not so much there are so many Debbie Downers, but there are so many confused women and men, by the way.
Yes.
We've lost the language. We don't know what to do or say. But
there's no doubt about that.
And thank you so much for joining us, and loved hearing your commentary and view of the other side.
Wonderful.
So thank you, and
I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, we loved having you, and we'll have you again. We want to hear what
Yes.
If we ever get out of this pandemic.
Out of our living rooms and bedrooms.
Come to the cesspool of Washington.
Is that an unmade bed back there?
No, I made it. Actually, my husband made it. And in all honesty, he said you should make the bed.
Doesn't look like he did a very good job, but no, I'm no judgment.
Well, that's because I have a lot of clothes piled on top of it.
Oh, so your bed is your closet. Oh.
There we go.
All right, thank you. Ann.
My pleasure.
All right, let's all just pause there for one moment, because we, believe it or not, have another sponsor this week, which is great. This sponsor is Bambi. I've run a small business in the past, and I know one of the most challenging things is having to take on so many jobs yourself. And I think as women, it's often in our nature to do that, and certainly not delegate. But everyone needs to delegate. And so when running a business, HR issues in particular can kill you. Wrongful termination suits, minimum wage requirements, labor regulations, and HR manager salaries aren't cheap. They're an average of $70,000 a year. Bambi, spelled B-A-M-B-E-E, was created specifically for small business. You can get a dedicated HR manager, craft HR policy, and maintain your compliance, all for just $99 a month. With Bambi, you can change HR from your biggest liability to your biggest strength. Go to Bambi.com/fem, F-E-M, right now to schedule your free HR audit. Bambi can help you by getting your free HR audit today. That's Bambi.com/fem, spelled B-A-M to the BEE.com/fem. But that was fascinating. Caitlin, what was your take? What was your take on all of that?
Well, I thought she was a really, like a consequential person. She was talking about deeply important things that don't get talked about much within our culture.
Like ever.
And what I always say about myself is that because I'm a card-carrying Democrat, so, my conservatism is a very mild conservatism compared to, hardcore conservatives. But I always say there's nothing less sexy than being the person who's going to talk about family and being the person who's going to talk about like the pleasures of it. It's just like instantly you are just seen again, just Christina was saying earlier, as sort of a church lady. And it's really hard to find, to get through in the culture in a way that's kind of attractive to young people, because you just seem to be. But then on the other hand, I have found that there is a tremendous number of young people who are desperate to hear these kind of messages and really don't know how to enter this new world where marriage isn't kind of a guaranteed thing, and don't know how to go through life unpartnered for so many years. And I think that there's a craving for it. And so you can certainly talk to people who are interested in it, but then there's just this feeling that she's, it's just hard. It's a hard position.
Right. And I think that what I loved about the series is, also, as you say, like, in the end, who do you identify with? And I super identified with the wardrobe of Phyllis Schlafly, but I totally loved and admired Gloria Steinem's hip, cool girl, sexy clothing. And it's like, speaking of Catholicism, it's either the Madonna or the whore,
right.
There seems to be no getting away from it. And obviously, Gloria Steinem carried the younger, hipper, cooler vote, but they also didn't. What I liked about the Phyllis character is Gloria never had to work it. She never looked at it from human happiness, to go to our earlier conversation, that she didn't. I always felt, and when I would debate with feminists of, sort of more ideological, that they could say great big applause lines, but they didn't have to actually do the homework and work it out. And what does this really mean for women? Are you saying we should never find happiness in marriage or children, or that should be a secondary aspect of our lives, because the all-important career or job or independence or self-dependence, which is a good thing, took primary cause? And
but there's even something more sinister, which, if Davy Waller was a little more well-read, or it knew one moderate or conservative would have discovered, is that the sexual revolution and blowing up the family and all that, actually the elites never did it. Never. If you look at upper middle class women, their families look like Phyllis Schlafly's. I mean, they have kids, they have their marriages are strong. What happened was people who could afford it the least, and it was the lower middle class and the poor, those families were blown up. There was no more commitment to the family unit, and they sort of glamorized single mothers and made it seem wonderful. And so now we have a culture of fatherlessness. And many young men that are never going to be
destroying us.
It's destroying us.
Destroying us.
But and as several social critics have said, is that the elites don't, they don't
walk the walk.
They don't walk the walk, and no, because they have the stable marriages, but they don't preach what they practice. What they practice is traditional values. And she was reviled. So they got the advantage of being hip and épaté bourgeoisie, and that's cool. But their marriages, their children have sound families and structure, and the rest of the culture, they just did not, well, maybe they cared, but they were careless.
And I also agree, though, with Anne that, and I see this in my own daughters, that they're looking for rocks in the creek, the rapids, to hang on to and be validated in their choices. That,
and what are the rocks? What do you mean?
Well, like
who is they? Who are we talking about?
Okay, so we're talking about, so the other day I was watching with my 18-year-old daughter another miniseries, because of course that's what we're all doing right now, called Normal People, I think it's called.
Oh, yes. You should do an episode on that. What do you... Oh.
Let's have her on. Can we have her on?
Yeah, Caitlin will have you back for that. But anyway, no spoiler alert, because I've literally only watched the first episode, because then I had to switch to Mrs.
The second episode will blow the back of your head off.
Okay.
I read the book. I've got to see the series.
Okay. Anyway, so very easy 3-line setup, set in Ireland, nerdy girl, jock boy in high school are attracted to each other, and it's weird because, of course, she's the unpopular weirdo and he's Mr. Hunt. But here is the scene. So it's the first episode. I'm watching this with my 18-year-old daughter. And they realize they like each other. They're super awkward with each other. They can't even have a conversation. They're so awkward. Yet she invites him, or actually invites herself, to come to his house and take off her clothes. And I turned to my daughter at that point, speaking about awkward, I turned to her, I said, Wait. It is less intimate and easier to take off your clothes and have sex with someone than have a conversation. Like, they can't even talk to each other. They're so awkward.
But what I thought was so beautiful.
My daughter said yes. She said yes. That's how it is. That they're.
Wait, Caitlin, what were you going to say?
Well, there was why I thought that this series is like a really hopeful series for young people, is that they were so awkward with each other, but as they come together in sex, it is incredibly, they find this true nature of each other as sexual beings, and his crudeness and callousness or heartlessness a little bit at school that he comes to regret deeply is nowhere involved in his sexual self. And he's completely asking her in a very natural way if this is okay. And you just felt like, it just felt like there was so much passion in there.
Well, I was watching this because it had been billed as this true romantic with hope. But I was just struck by my daughter, 18-year-old daughter's reaction is, yes, sex is more like getting a coffee.
Is getting what?
Is more like getting a coffee.
But I don't think the sex itself that is going on with no coffee involved today is like the sex in that show, where it's quiet, they're alone, they have space.
Primordial, and I remember the scene, and it was it's just a basic like male and female communication. Yes,
and that they just it was an extraordinary scene of many. And there's a whole stupid subplot because how long can you keep this going? But just the idea of really discovering someone's true nature through sex, I think that's totally gone. I don't think today, yes, they go right to bed, but they don't discover anybody's nature. Well, and these kids, what was also interesting, because they didn't meet on an app, they met in a natural way, and that this is it. The sex that they had was in no way the sex that you see on Pornhub. It wasn't, they jump together and their lips are smashing and they're pulling up clothes and they're changing positions like, acrobats every 10 seconds. And you're like, ugh.
Wait a minute. Have you been on Pornhub?
Oh, she hasn't.
I said literally only for professional reasons. I just too old to really see it. My biggest moment was when I noticed that the scene had the same carpet I have from IKEA. And I was like, that's my carpet. And I also thought it would get dirty quickly, so I went cheap. But
whoa!
But the sex that they have, that they are really young people. I hear this all the time. And if you have any friends who are therapists, ask them what young women say. Young men too, but really young women. Like, I hate this.
No, it is a porn hubberia out there for young women, and they're taught or not taught. They believe they should feel empowered and wonderful. And they don't. And
I don't think anybody's having any sex that's like that sex anymore.
Yeah. Wait. I disagree.
Okay, good.
There must be.
Christina, are you having that sex?
No, I wish.
I meant young people.
Maybe with Izzy, but that's a whole other subject. No, I think that human nature, human beings are resilient and fundamentally sound, and there must be tender, beautiful, young people having tender, beautiful sex, I'm sure.
Okay. Good.
Well,
but you don't think that the sex is, because when we were
But I think it's despite the culture and despite like horrible messages. I agree that, the pornography and all of that is just like.
And I don't even know. I wouldn't even say the culture. I think this is honestly just what's happening with the availability. And we're also seeing, honestly, that Gen Z is like, we've talked about this, like the least likely to be having sex, the most depressed, Like, it's crazy.
They always go together.
No, I remember I said to right.
I don't think they're depressed either, but I don't want to be controversial. I don't think they're that depressed.
My mother, who listens to this podcast, hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
I remember her saying to me when I was like 14, and it was creepy in some ways to a 14-year-old, but it was like, sex should be wonderful. It should be fun. It should. It's like
her mom is my role model.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Awesome.
I don't know how old she is, but she's still a babe. She was like you can looking at Danielle, you can see she was a beauty queen back in Melbourne.
She also tossed off this advice, but it's funny what things stick to kids. David has this joke that he says kids are deaf, but they see everything. But this, she actually told it to me and it stuck, was, she had worked, she was a journalist. She stayed home when we were very young. She said, it was the greatest thing. I loved having kids. It was so wonderful. Once you got in school, boy, was I ready to go back to work. It was just a very refreshing, like, all of these parts of your life can be enriching. Mm-hmm. And Caitlin, what you were saying at the top of the show of this sense of enslavement, work, and my parents, my mom, they were not wealthy. It was not an elite thing to do. They were both journalists, which at the time was very working class. I think of them as like firemen or something. Mm-hmm. And, they really struggled financially, but they just did it. And they got through. And those first 5-6 years of my life, were formed by and my mom still worked part-time. They ran boarding house. Oh my God, it was nightmarish for her. It was good for us. And anyway.
But this whole idea now that it keeps the feminism, it keeps going farther and farther and farther to where now, I think in the 70s and 80s, there was more a sense of you can have it all, just not all at the same time. And there was a sense that you could kind of, people would say, I remember being in that generation, you'll have a job and, good to find one that you can kind of step out of or you can get back into. And that was great because I was a teacher, so that's perfect. But now with the lean in movement, that's still that notion that, no, you have to lean into that job as though you had no other responsibilities at home. And you have to, and there are certain careers where if you really want to get to that top spot, you have to just do that. And I just think it's terribly destructive.
Well, and now in this economy and what most women, and I think that was one of Phyllis Schlafly's messages that she understood. And this was like, I'm sure not fictionalized, but that moment in the series where she turns to Betty Friedan in that debate and she says, you're not thinking of the older middle-aged women who will have no protections. Under the ERA, that they have devoted their lives. And that, remains a problem today, that if you stay home, if you are able to stay home, you risk very real economic sacrifices.
For sure.
If you're not in a profession that is lenient. And I guess the point is we haven't resolved it in this episode.
I mean, you're just so right, is that you take time off work, you miss, 5 years, you miss a bunch of raises along the way.
Yeah.
So they're having this thing, I don't know if it's going to work or not. Salary had been because women, because of this, I think it's because these women who chose to stay home lost all these raises and they have to come in saying, well, I'm making this. And I made this at my old job. And then they give you a small bump up from that maybe. But it's so big trade-offs and no protections at all, really. Some safety nets, but it was the old thing from the 50s where someone married a woman married a guy in medical school and she got them through and, made beans and rice to get them through. And then they get everything going and he divorces her and she's got absolutely nothing. Right. But I think there's a lot more protections now in marriage and divorce to keep the women get something.
I don't know.
I think there used to be more I don't know, when I was younger, if people got divorced, it was rare. And it was before the divorce revolution, and the structure of responsibility remained in place. So there was alimony and so forth. But again, this was for elites. This was all, at that time, the women's movement and so forth was really a movement among elites. And it was what professional, successful upper middle class women were asking for, and they were just at less risk than other women. So the weakening of marriage didn't hurt them very much.
Right.
But
and it destroyed the working class traditional family.
That's what happened. That's what it just ravaged.
All right, so we have gone on, but Caitlin, what a treat! Oh my God, to have you.
Thank you. And I love seeing you there.
I love seeing your work top. I love the idea that you're in your pajama bottoms, day pajamas.
And my good blouse.
It's your good blouse.
Good blouse. I have my pajama bottoms, my good blouse.
Can you show America the pajama bottoms? Just.
I don't know if they'll show.
Oh my God.
I told David when David's in these recordings, he should just wear the suit and tie and then boxers, you know.
Yeah, that's what I do. And it's California, so it's warm. So
Yes, you are a California girl. I recognize a kindred spirit.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Right.
Thanks for
Thank you guys. This was really fun. Okay, talk soon. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Keep up with us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. Send questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com.
A big thanks to Ella Ryder, our research and in-studio production assistant, and to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor. And we're proud to be part of the Ricochet Network and grateful to the American Enterprise Institute for allowing us to record in its studio every week in downtown Washington, D.C.
And miss something? You'll find everything you need at our homepage, femsplainers.com, including links to past episodes, our sponsors, where you can sign up to support us, and even to merch. And please don't forget to like us or give us 5 stars on iTunes.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.